well, this system can't be right. We need to find another system. What I saw as the fallout from his action was him getting some death threats. There's a problem with our current system in the fact that it does not produce. You need to take tangible steps forward in solving this political divide, because a country divided just doesn't work.
Are we going to have to get every state involved, or is it just a few states will start to begin to see a difference?
I think it really is going to be a slow roll for a little bit. Give them that choice with the most representative electoral system. And whether you talk to a Republican or a Democrat, the one thing that everyone can agree on is that they're not very happy with what's going on.
Welcome back to Generally Speaking. I'm your host, General Spalding. Today we have Shea Siegert. He was the campaign manager for Proposition 2 in Alaska, and we're going to talk about that. And he's also the head of a couple of organizations, Alaskans for Better Elections. I think I got that right. But welcome, everybody, Shea Siegert. It's going to be a great conversation. So, Shea, thanks for being here. I got your name from Catherine Gale, who I spent a good time with, and that show should air here for fairly soon as well. But she recommended that I talk to you, and she said that you were inspired by not the book that she wrote, but the report. So can you just talk a little bit about what prompted you to really? I think you started a war with the political parties there in Alaska, but what got you interested in taking this on?
Yeah, I came on after it had been drafted. So it was Scott Kendall was the original author of the bill, and he and I and a host of other lawyers in the state of Alaska came together around this idea that we have this insane political polarization, and really you see the division continue to happen. And you see that first it started with the closed primaries. Really what this group formed around was taking away the ability of 5 or 6% of any given district, taking away that 5 or 6%'s ability to decide for the other 95% of the district. And what I mean by that is, in 2020, one thing that actually worked in our favor for the campaign, but not for the state, was we saw 9 broadly supported, bipartisanly supported legislators get ousted, by the low end being 6% of their district, the high end being 13% of their district. And 13% said, no, we don't want this person anymore. We're going to put forth this other person who will fall in party lines. And what happened was we saw a flood of dark money come in, a flood of partisan politics come in and play in a very siloed off group of the most radical voters in this closed primary system. And so we saw this happen time after time after time, where a politician would quite honestly do the right thing. And they would listen to their constituents, all of their constituents, regardless of partisanship, and then they would get punished and penalized by our former system now in Alaska, which feels really good to say. And they get penalized for going against our current governor, or going against their party and doing what's best for the people in their district, the majority of people in their district. And so we looked at that and said, well, this system can't be right. We need to find another system. And first we looked at a whole host of issues: top two nonpartisan open primaries, ranked choice voting in both the primary and the general election, finally landing on a top 4 open primary with ranked choice voting in the general, and then also making sure that voters had the power of information on the financial disclosure side. So we we increased disclosure laws on candidate independent expenditure groups. And what we saw was, people really were sick of the partisanship. I saw it firsthand working in the legislature in 2019. And I spent 3 sessions down in the legislature, but in 2019, I worked for a gentleman by the name of Representative Gary Knopp, and he was from the Kenai, a Republican. And coming out of the 2018 general election, 21 Republicans basically claimed that they had the majority caucus, and they were going to elect their speaker. Well, what happened was my boss, Representative Gary Knopp, stepped out of that caucus and said a caucus with 21 people in a 40-person legislature can't work, because then any given day, one person can hold all of the power of the legislative body. And so that just absolutely can't work. And so he stepped out and said, I'm not going to join a caucus that doesn't have representation from all sides. And what ended up happening was that action formed the only bipartisan coalition in the entire nation that year. And what I saw as the fallout from his action was him getting some death threats, him getting primaried, him having a town hall where special interest groups shipped in people to protest, shipped in people to cause a little bit of a ruckus during the town hall, where he was simply just trying to listen to his constituents. And we were heading into the primary in 2020. And I told him, I said, I got approached by this campaign, and I've helped along the way with studying some of the things they're trying to solve. I think this really could be a good thing. And he said, go do what's best for the state and join this team and go win that campaign. Because if you leave me and lose, that's a problem. But if you leave me and win, then we're doing well. And so I lived up to the word and won. We created a great team. But I would say working in the legislature and seeing it firsthand and seeing how good legislators continue to get punished by this closed primary system, and then we elect people with a plurality after that, it was just a system that continued to drive us apart and apart and apart, and not be able to focus on the issues at hand.
That is that sounds like a tough battle. And when I heard that, Alaska had actually voted this way in 2020, I was kind of shocked. So, and you guys, if I remember right, you didn't have a lot of money for your campaign. So tell me about that, how did you actually pull this off? Because it seems like, a long shot with the money that you had and kind of facing, I was reading an article before, this interview, where, both political parties went after you and said that, you're trying to take away Alaskans' right to vote, when you're actually trying to give Alaskans a really worthwhile vote. So tell me about that.
I think, really one thing that I credit our success to is really the fact that in Alaska, if something's broken, people fix it. Also, if you are passing someone along the road and they're pulled over, you don't just keep on going. You stop over and fix it. You don't ask them what political party they're a part of, because it's most likely that they're not part of a political party, because people move up here or stay up here because they want to experience new adventures. They want to take care of their land. They want to live out on their own and be independent, which is why that might be one of the main reasons why we have the highest percentage of nonpartisan and undeclared registrants in this nation. And so in Alaska, we have over 60% of registered voters choose not to register as either of the two major parties, being Republican or Democrat. We have a really independent, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, fix your own system. Don't worry about what the lower 48's doing, type of way of life. And so really what I think came down to was Alaskans, as Alaskans, we saw the dismal results that our current system was providing. We saw the divide at our own family dinner tables. If you had family members who thought one way and other family members who thought another, some people would leave the family or leave the dinner. That's not how politics should be. Politics should be an open conversation of civil discourse, and that's what we wanted, and that's what Alaska voters said on November 3rd. And it was quite great to see it. It's not a surprise, having lived here for enough time to see the strong, independent nature of Alaskans. It really was a testament to who we are and what we believe in and what we think should be happening in our state capital, the national capital, and in our own conversations.
So if you're going to advise somebody that was in another state, what would be, so Catherine said that there's 10 other states that are considering similar legislation. So one of the things you did differently from the book is you had a Final Four instead of a Final Five. How did you arrive at Final Four? And then how would you recommend people get involved at a local level in their state to begin to make this change?
Yeah, and I'll attack the first question first and answer that. I would say start having these conversations with anyone and everyone. It's something that all voters can agree is something that all voters can agree to is that there's a problem with our current system. When we're tackling COVID issues, when we're tackling revenue sources and balanced budgets, there's a problem with our current system in the fact that it does not produce. There's also a problem with our current system in the fact that we have a public approval rating of our legislature, our national Congress of 8, 9, 10% today. Maybe it's 7% today, but yet our retention rate is up in the high 90s of incumbent legislators. That is not a system that's serving the voter. When 92% of the electorate says you're not doing your job correctly, yet we continue to hire that person, there might be an issue there. And so really having that conversation, but extending that conversation. All of us like to talk about the problems in Washington, D.C. or our own state capitals, but when it comes time for a solution, it kind of falls down to viability. It says, well, yeah, that would be great, but do you think that could ever happen? Do you think we could actually ever, take on the two-party system or take on this electoral system and change it for the better? And normally the conversation ends at, no, not really. We can't do that. And that's the problem is that we have the solution right in front of us. It's Final Five or Final Four voting. And really, whether you do Final Four or Final Five, it's kind of arbitrary to the fact that you need to take tangible steps forward in solving this political divide, because a country divided just doesn't work. It's not a country at all. And so we continue to need to take these tangible steps. And so as for Final Four versus Final Five, we started at Final Four and back when this all was getting drafted, basically we decided that Final Four would be the adequate number because we have a Republican, a Democrat, and then we can get other parties represented as well. Because we have strong third parties. We have a strong Libertarian Party here in Alaska. We have a strong Green Party here in Alaska. But really what it's about is giving everyone an equal opportunity to get to the general ballot, regardless of partisanship, treating candidates and voters the same. One thing I said during the campaign a lot was, no matter who you talk to, you really expect legislators to work across party lines. You expect them to work together and compromise and work towards the greater good. But when we go to vote in a closed primary system, we don't let ourselves vote across party lines how we expect our legislators to act in Juneau or in our state capital across the nation. And so that's the problem, is that, we expect these legislators to work and vote across party lines, but yet we don't let our voters vote across party lines. And so attacking those systemic issues can lead to better results. People taking stands for the betterment of their constituents, making the only special interest that matters in this whole political process be one group of people, which is the voters. So I think that's really what gets to the essence of that question is having the conversations first, getting a group of people who are ready to act. And whether you live in a legislative state or a ballot initiative state, acting, making sure that you get involved and start having these conversations and creating a group around it, and really fighting against the doubting of viability. You can point to Maine, who passed ranked choice voting. You can point to New York City. You can point to Alaska now in passing Final Five. And hopefully soon you'll be able to point to a whole lot more states in terms of being viability, credible sources of viability for these initiatives.
What what's been the response there in Alaska? I think I'm guessing the political parties never thought that this would be passed, or how have they responded to the change?
It's been pretty quiet since the election. They haven't said anything either way. I think they're starting to plan for the next few years, the next election, and they've reached out to us, and we've actually seen a growth in our support. People who were once against us, who are saying, look, you won. This is the will of the voters. Let's start planning and making sure this goes well. We're working with the administration, the current state administration, the governor's office, to make sure that these policies are implemented to the intent and will of the voters. And they welcome us with open arms, which is fantastic. And really, we're seeing legislators and voters say, we're excited for the next election because we're going to have a better election system. We're going to have our election system that we put into place. And so really what we've seen is that 51% that this was passed by grow to 60, 62%, and hopefully it'll keep on growing.
Wow. So do you have aspirations for office, or are you content to kind of lead the charge in this voting effort?
I really enjoy just leading the charge in this voting effort. It is, I'm a young guy who really has enjoyed working on candidate campaigns for candidates of all political beliefs, but really under one umbrella of wanting to get what's right done. And so seeing this policy change and this electoral system change through to the end and through to making sure that it stays for years to come is really important to me. And so in the near future, no political aspirations other than making sure the will of the voters is upheld here.
What do you think, when you look at our national scene, obviously there's going to be big change in Alaska. What is it going to take to tip the balance in our national scene so that we have more balance? Are we going to have to get every state involved, or is it just a few states will start to begin to see a difference?
I think it really is going to be a slow roll for a little bit. I think it's really important for states like Alaska to take it upon themselves to change their own voting system, to answer the question of what do we want from our elected officials, but more so, what do we want to incentivize with our electoral system? Do we want to incentivize party pandering and political strategy and and paying paychecks of political operatives? Or do we want to take it upon ourselves to make the only incentive to have a message and have a policy and platform that aligns with over 50% of the voters in any given state? So I think really, as I look across the nation, it's going to be one state at a time, trying to pass this for the betterment of their electoral system. And then finally, hopefully, we'll get a fast roll and get some great electeds up in Washington, D.C., who don't look at it as a lifelong career, but rather they want to go down to D.C. and get a job done, and get the job done that serves their state, their constituents, and make sure at the end of the day that our democracy is intact. And so also, when I look at national events, I see people on both sides of the aisle, and seeing them say essentially the same thing, in the fact that we have a lot of problems with our current system. And whether you talk to a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, the one thing that everyone can agree on is that they're not very happy with what's going on in politics, and they don't want to talk about it. And so when I see that, it says to me that, well, it's never been a better time to attack this system and make sure that we fix it for ourselves, ourselves being the voters.
When you look out there at kind of some of the states that are looking at this, are there any that have reached out to you that come to mind? Do you think that are close, maybe in 2022, to taking the step?
A lot of states have reached out, and it's from Oregon to Florida to Arizona to Georgia to all of these different places that are saying, could this be our time to do this? And there's a lot of time between now and 2022, and a lot of landscape changes, political strategy changes. But I would say every state is on the hot seat to try and get this done. I think I personally, as one person of this team, have been reached out to by at least 25 states, if not more. And just people getting my email off the website and saying, I want to talk to this guy. And I, of course, am like, well, this is great. I'd love to talk to you about what we did in Alaska. I love to talk. So I would say, when I look across the nation, one state or a few states that come to mind are, Maine could really do well with a Final Five system in their primary. They still have closed primaries. Massachusetts, they had a ranked choice voting ballot initiative on the ballot last time around, and it was a close campaign, a very well-run campaign, and it came up short. I think they're right to have another ballot initiative, possibly a Final Five ballot initiative, come up soon. Georgia is a legislative state. That one looks like a really prominent area in terms of the fact that, they had a campaign, they have runoffs for their statewide campaigns, and they had campaign and political season that lasted what felt like to Georgians, 2 years, because it was quite a few elections and a lot of money spent. And so I would say, when I look at Georgia, I would say, probably most of those people might not necessarily like having their mailboxes full to the brim with political mailers, or they're having to answer their door 5 or 10 times a day, being reminded to vote for this person or the next. And so that might be a good area. And so really name a state, and we can say why it's a good idea to attack it in 2022 with these policies.
So term limits. Do you think that if you go this route, it obviates the need for term limits because the candidate or the the senator or the representative, if they're not doing the job, they're going to get voted out anyway. What's your opinion? So do we need to go the extra step of term limits, or just having the ability to vote in this way should obviate the need for that?
I think it's all predictions at this point because we haven't had an election under the current system. But what I will say is term limits. The best term limit is having a system that is the most representative of the people acting in that system, the voters. And so really making sure that the need for term limits comes from this idea, in my experience, that people have been down there too long and they're making this a career and they're not in tune with the voters anymore. And so they need to get out procedurally and be term limited out. The problem with that is that you lose some institutional knowledge. You may lose a representative or a senator who actually was the best for their constituents and actually always working on behalf of their constituents. And if the constituents want somebody in there for 100 years, then they should have that choice. And so what I would say is truly give them that choice with the most representative electoral system that you can find. And we landed on final 5, final 4 voting and thought, this would be the most, this would take away some of the need for term limits, because now we can really truly make sure that if we have a representative in Washington, D.C. or in Juneau or a senator in either place, that they are truly supported by over 50% of the voters.
So you mentioned Massachusetts and New York. How did their programs compare to yours? Did yours go farther? Is it how do they match up?
Yeah, so New York City passed ranked choice voting for their municipal elections, and so they no.
Does that include the mayor?
I believe so, but I would have to check. But so municipalities or cities across the nation have adopted ranked choice voting. I think it's up to 23 cities now, maybe more. And they're using ranked choice voting, San Francisco, Oakland, Minneapolis, St. Paul. A lot of cities are using ranked choice voting. A lot of parties are using ranked choice voting for their primaries. And so that's how that one's different. There's only one election. Massachusetts now had ranked choice voting only. And so ours does not have ranked choice voting in the primary election. We have a top 4 open primary where we are voting under traditional voting methods. And so
just whoever gets the top 4 that gets the highest number of votes.
Yes. And those move on, and then we have ranked choice voting in the general. And so in Maine, they had ranked choice voting in both the primary and the general. And then Massachusetts, I believe, was ranked choice voting in both the primary and the general. The other thing that ours had was that probably sparked the most controversy, and probably was the motivating factor for folks to come out against us, was the dark money provision. We wanted to shine a true light on the source of funds coming into our state. And as our state goes up each year in record-setting spending for non-presidential and presidential years, it's become ever more apparent that we need more financial disclosure. And, Justice Kennedy, who wrote the majority opinion in Citizens United, said it best. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he said the decision in Citizens United and the amount of money will become arbitrary, because the disinfectant for corruption and all of this money will be states accepting disclosure laws and strengthening their financial disclosure laws. And that'll be the disinfectant. Well, it had been about a decade since that decision, and we hadn't updated our financial disclosure laws. And so we decided that we needed to. And that we were biting off a big bite of the apple, and we were hoping we could chew it, and ended up being able to chew it just by a hair. And ever since it's passed, like I said, it's definitely grown in support.
What exactly are those disclosure laws? What do people have to disclose?
Yeah, so let's say you have three entities. You have this massive funder, this really, really, really wealthy person, this intermediary national PAC, super PAC called Apple Pie for America. And they want to support me for Congress in Alaska. So what they would do is they would come in and give it to an independent expenditure group, which would go towards supporting me, but my campaign can never talk to the independent expenditure group. It's a shadow campaign, essentially, that either goes to support me or oppose my opposition. And all of this money comes into the independent expenditure group that has essentially no financial contribution limits from PACs and super PACs. And so that super PAC gives $1 million to the IE, and that IE spends $1 million in the state of Alaska, which can go a long way. And the voters look at the financial disclosure laws or the financial disclosures from this independent expenditure group and go, Apple Pie for America, of course, $1 million. Well, they don't know what, voters don't know what Apple Pie for America is. It could have been set up 6 months outside of the election. And they have no idea about the platform. They have no idea about its donors until February, when the IRS reports come out. Well, information in February doesn't do much good on November 3rd of the year prior. And so what our disclosure laws said was, if you're going to spend money, Apple Pie for America, if you're going to spend money in Alaska, we need to know where those dollars came from if they're over $2,000. We need to know exactly who those dollars came from. And it says that the burden is on Apple Pie for America to provide the true source of the funds, being anyone who earned or inherited those funds.
So what do you think you're going to find when that begins? Are they just not going to donate, or are you expecting to find people that you thought were there? What's your belief?
I think what we're going to find is that I think political spending may go down a bit for the first few years as people get used to the new laws. But hopefully what we're going to find is that people are comfortable with putting their name next to something they're doing in a state they've never been to. And my mother always told me, if you're going to do something, you better be okay with your name being next to it. And so I think what we're going to find is that, journalists, our level of public information through our media and our reports that are researchable and can inform voters, they're all going to increase, and people's knowledge of where money is coming from and what the politics behind this funding is. We're going to find out more about that. And something that I'm really excited for is that when I read the local paper here, the ADN, the Anchorage Daily News, or Alaska Public Media, or Alaska's news source, I'll read something that informs me off of who are the people behind the candidates and tells me a little bit about what those people's platforms are. Because if there's something in their platform that leads them to supporting state house candidates in Alaska to the tune of $500,000, well, it must be something pretty important in their platform. So I better know about that. And so I'm really excited and think that our level of journalism or ability to put these into newspapers and into the public knowledge is going to go up, which is really exciting.
So do you have a hero, so to speak, in politics? Is there somebody that inspired you to get involved like you are?
I would say my former boss, Gary Knopp, Representative Gary Knopp, he did pass away during the campaign, in a pretty big tragedy, accident. But I would say he really played a part in a massive part, and he's a Republican. The other one is the former Senate Minority Leader, Senator Berta Gardner, who I lived with when I came up here from Alabama, and I was a Republican at the time and went to living with, a woman who was the Senate Minority Leader as a Democrat in the state of Alaska, and we sat around her dinner table for hours debating the issues. And I am a youngest sibling, so I like poking holes in both sides, and so I debate with Gary just as much as I debate with Berta. Those two people, and also my English teacher in high school, who is, Andrea Simmons. She definitely, played a massive part in making sure that I got into politics.
Well, Shea, you may not consider yourself this, but I think you're a great patriot, and I really appreciate the work you're doing for Alaskans and Americans. I think this is so important that we get involved, that we actually reform our political system. It has become too partisan. DC is where I live, and I get a face full of it every single day, and I absolutely abhor it. So I'm so excited to be able to meet you and talk to you and really introduce you to our audience here at Generally Speaking. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. Keep doing what you're doing, inspire others, and work for the American people.
Well, thank you so much. It was really an honor being on your show, and I think the same of you. So I really appreciate this, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, if you stayed to the end, I hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to leave comments below, like and subscribe. Thank you for coming on. Generally Speaking, I'm General Spalding.